All He Wants for Christmas, written by Anne Malley, narrated by Nikki Franklin. Chapter 1. Nana's a Gamer. 2 weeks till Christmas. You leave for Fiji in 5 hours, Hannah said on the other end of the phone. A car will pick you up outside your building. High on hope, Sophie Black thanked God. She'd beat the snowy pavement to secure investors for her growing environmental impact fund all morning. Next up, after a short stop, was a platinum opportunity that would take Sophie away, and she needed it. Memories dimmed the crazy snowflakes despite the separation from a man she couldn't stop thinking about. She flicked her brow as if she'd be able to strip away what ailed her. But life wasn't like that. Life was often unfair, no matter how much one hoped, believed, or tried. You there? Hannah asked. Sophie blinked ice off her lashes. I'm here, and amazed. Amazed? Please. Efficiency, thy name is Hannah, Sophie said. Faking happy until she made it was better than humbugging. With her phone snuggled between her gloved hand and one chilled ear, she yanked her coat closer with the other. She pressed on. She stomped on the salted sidewalk to ensure balance. Her aching feet protested from inside trendy booty heels she'd bought in another effort to stay positive. Could buy had supplanted should buy when she'd indulged herself on Madison Avenue last weekend. Her heels were high, and she'd underestimated the walk to Gamer's Grotto. But Sophie had to stop in before leaving the country if she wanted Nana's eyes to pop. Granddaughters with 6-figure salaries were expected to perform. That was fine by Sophie. Nana was all the family she needed, and paybacks were owed considering her grandmother raised her. Sophie dodged slow walkers. Is there anything else? Asked Hannah. Yeah, don't quit on me, Sophie said in a jolly tone that wasn't. Holidays could be magical in all the wrong ways, and Hannah was stone cold in love. Her assistant's professionalism couldn't mask the melt when her fireman arrived for lunch, an early dinner, or just to say hello. And check in with Morgan, the sexagenarian skirt chaser who'd hinted at a heavy investment in Sophie's, had suggested Fiji for her presentation. An island getaway was a risk worth taking, though, if she wanted to close the year with a bang. She'd swat Morgan like the hairy bug he was if he tried anything. Hold on a sec for contact info, Sophie said. Morgan had insisted on direct communications with Sophie before he'd gone dark. But he'd show up in Fiji if only to get what he thought she'd sell, being separated and all. You still there? Sophie asked. I'm not going anywhere, Hannah assured over the holiday hubbub. Right. Sophie thrust a hand toward the shop's door handle. The brass refused to twist. She cranked her wrist. Sophie pulled hard. Whoa, whoa. Her cry flew along with the phone. Nobody steadied her, though. Nobody noticed, Sophie guessed, regaining her footing in an awkward swoop of arms. The Salvation Army volunteer rang his bell as if nothing happened. But nothing had happened. She just felt sick to her stomach. But that would stop once she was airborne. No worries. A couple of boys exited the shop with their whey-faced dad. Sophie assumed he was their father. Snatching her phone, she slipped inside the store, ignoring giggles as the kids ran toward their mom. That was another assumption, but Sophie couldn't help casting everyone as family. She couldn't have children, so she engaged in the next best thing, torturing herself by casting everyone everywhere as the perfect little unit. Hannah shouted, Are you all right? Sophie? Sophie, say something. I'm great, she fibbed. My meeting with Bush and Bush ended with a firm handshake. We're guaranteed another $50 million. That's less than you hoped, but you'll have your legacy, boss. I feel it. Me too. Providing capital for clean water strategies, greener energy methods, and the means to feed the hungry makes me feel like Santa Claus, Sophie said. Mr. and Mrs. Claus had no kids either. Spread the news. All of it? What do you mean? I still can't believe Nana Black was a pro gamer. I can't imagine her not playing. Better than Prozac, Nana would say before she'd turned pro for all of one summer. Gaming kept her busy while Granddad was away. Alone now, Nana needed fun more than ever, and Sophie longed for the joy of seeing her smile. Something to beat him at is all she wanted. Like you're going to beat Darius? My husband isn't our problem anymore. Not once he signed the divorce papers and overcame the blow of Sophie leaving him and his precious Andino group. You sure you don't need me to pick up that video game? I'm already here. Sophie took a moment to open the note app on her phone. She read the latest from Morgan who, as anticipated, attempted to create a personal vibe by assuming a familiarity that didn't exist and never would. The Tetris game is here too. The original version put out by Sega glowed behind glass casing up ahead. No worries, she said, more for her own benefit. Okay, don't scare me like that, though. I'll try to be good. Thanks for everything, sweetie. Sophie focused on the factory-perfect box behind the counter. We're going to get this. All of it. The game, Morgan's money, and the future Sophie needed beyond marital expectations hovered within her grasp. A baby maker she was not, and wanting wasn't having. She hung up the phone and shouldered through a sea of wool coats and mufflers. Holiday hellos and Scrooge-worthy scowls reset her head. So, she'd almost landed on her rear outside the shop. Big deal. If she planned to grow her company, she'd take hits, without the gilded cage or manly hands to cushion her fall. Rick, the shop's owner and operator, keyed open the case to withdraw a pristine tomato-red box, perfectly preserved in cellophane. His crocheted Santa beard and flannel shirt, complete with LED-studded suspenders, blinking double time, forced a smirk she couldn't tame. Looking fabulous, Sophie called. Glad someone thinks so. He turned with the Sega game held in museum fashion. Pinkies extended for minimal contact, as if holding the box would mar the white stone castle with the golden, onion domes. Give me a sec? What for? I don't need bubble wrap, or any wrap. The game was in mint condition, and the high price validated her even though it was well within budget. When she'd received the email announcing its arrival, she'd squealed like a kid. She did the same now. Sophie moved toward the counter with her gaze fixed. I'll take it as is, she said. That cellophane will be torn and trashed before you can say Merry Christmas. She's right, he said. The Greek god voice rolling off Mount Olympus set her skin on vibrate. Sophie exhaled and not with relief. Tension licked her spine as her husband came up close behind her. Too close. There was no need to turn and confirm. Memories came on like an avalanche intended to overwhelm. Good, bad, delicious, and dangerous were rolled into one. I'm hoping the game will be used, he said, although the decision isn't mine. Sophie growled low. Tell me you are not following me. Facing Darius head-on was out. She'd spent the whole of November and nearly all of December battling imaginary puppy dog scenarios of a weeping, wounded Greek. A macho puddle would have pleased her. Maybe. Whichever. Darius pinged the soft spot she had for finance wizards, who could rob corporate pirates while shying at spiders. But her husband wasn't following her, not in the sense she wanted. He'd let her walk out of their apartment without a word. Then he filed a countersuit, claiming she'd taken Andino Group privileged property just to drag out what could have been an easy divorce. Why was anyone's guess? Darius had to be relieved that she'd made the split, alleviating him of the burden of looking bad for leaving her. Well, she prompted in the silence of other people's noise. Turnabout is fair play. What? You are following me. She spun towards those blue-ringed olive eyes she'd love to hate. I'm attempting to live my life, that's all. But if you're fearful of crossing paths with me, you can head out to that speck island you call home. Mathraki. It's Greek, but easy enough for a woman of intellect to remember. Should she wish it. He shrugged like he always did when she made light of his country home. She wasn't trying to be flip, and they both knew it. Sophie never stopped liking him, but marrying Darius meant marrying a tribe, a family first, outsiders never clan, that wanted no part of the broken one. The push to trade Sophie in was obvious, even if Darius played deaf, dumb, and blind. But I was here first, her husband teased. She blinked to clear the way for logic. Says you. This Tetris is mine. His or one of a gazillion nephews, Sophie qualified. Darius lifted his gaze. He extracted a card from the inside of his wool coat. The leather gloves she'd given him last Christmas stretched across those thick fingers, and she couldn't help tracking their progress as the card made its way over her shoulder. If only her problem with Darius extended to the physical, encounters would be easier. The days of easy exchanges were over, though, despite the force quaking her bones. Being friends was not an option. Please bubble wrap it, he instructed. Then deliver the game to the address on the card with the note we discussed. The lady may want to keep her gift as an investment. The lady? Sophie tamed her flaring nostrils. Chapter 2. Mrs. Claus. Darius used the words that once appeased her. Please, Sophie, let's not argue. He'd do whatever it took to dispel the tension claiming her beautiful face. His own jaw tensed. His heart had stopped as soon as he'd spotted her brushing snow off her coat at the front of the shop. She glared at him now. I've wanted that Sega game since forever. But wants were a nothing. Darius needed his wife. He ached for her to admit her desires, and she had, if only for an instant. Her switch from jealousy to the task at hand came too late to fool him. Her brilliant blue eyes, flashing wrath however briefly, told Darius there was hope for him. His only mission was to rekindle her caring, and that he'd handle delicately. Apologies didn't fly with Sophie. Repeated attempts to communicate sorrow had fallen flat despite her believing that's what she craved. His tone and timing were never quite right because everything was wrong, or so she thought. You knew I was after that game, and you sharked me, she continued. Sharked? He asked with a lazy brow lift. But Darius wasn't stupid. Despite having asked the question, yes, he knew Sophie wanted the Tetris game. He'd known everything about his wife at one time. Darius had made knowing her his main focus, ever since meeting the analyst with the amazing white, blonde hair and miraculous drive who'd initially turned him down. Co-workers should not date. The couple had shared that standard, and the mutual obliteration thereof. The pairing of CEO and eager intern had proved to be the sweetest taboo. Sophie couldn't bear to look at him now. She couldn't stand him for a long while before she'd left him, too. Hindsight was colder than the snow piling up outside the shop, and yet she wasn't completely immune to him. Customers buzzed around like elves while Darius ran his lower lip between his teeth. There's nothing underhanded about me getting to Gamer's Grotto first. Unless you followed me, no. He waved the card at Rick, his sleeve inches from Sophie's shoulder. We want the same things. Love, acceptance, and a stimulating exchange had formed their initial bond. Nobody could argue like Sophie. Crossing paths is natural. Unnatural was man and wife, home for the holidays, at separate locations. Worse was Sophie heading to some Fijian paradise to land Ross Q. Morgan, a slobbering moneybags who thrilled at making an impact on other men's wives. Sophie had flown beneath the old goat's radar, chiefly because she paid no attention. Her intense focus and believing the best of others, so long as they weren't related to her, blinded her to much of what went on. Sophie feared sharking, but she was chasing a saw-toothed hammerhead. Just stop trailing me, she said. She pressed her muffler against her neck. Please. Don't you want my company trailing yours? He threw out. Rick pretended he was busy with a customer on the phone. Once this exchange was over, he probably knew Sophie would disappear. Disaster in Fiji and, ultimately, the divorce Darius didn't want would follow. "You've been following me," he teased. "And turnabout, as I said. Don't bring work into it. This is personal." "I thought we'd left personal behind," Darius said. The crowd pressed, and he held his ground. Sophie shrugged out from under his arm. She thrust out that pouty lower lip he loved kissing, but affection would get him nowhere. Competition would. Attraction resided in the mind, she'd once said. If he hoped to rekindle Sophie's, first things needed to come first. Their rivalry of ideas was a potent aphrodisiac. He shifted out of her way as if he needed to. "Pardon me." A mother and two boys, one wide-eyed and mooning over the glassed-in games, the other snuggled in a baby carrier, crowded Sophie toward the counter. The woman apologized, believing Sophie was put off by the glancing of hard plastic. Darius knew better, even without seeing want shudder through his wife. She had to be dying when a miniature of the mother pushed toward the counter with cheek aglow. "Are you collecting or cornering the market?" Sophie asked Darius blandly. "Neither." She twisted toward the counter and crooked an arm to avoid colliding with the girl's bobbing head. "Can you get me another Tetris?" she asked Rick. The store owner clicked his tongue while Darius gave his head a discreet shake. "I can't promise anything before Christmas. I'll try, though." Rick was trying with his female counterpart, who whipped aside the draped door separating the counter from the storeroom. Darius's cousin, one Sophie had never met, was dressed as a sexy Mrs. Claus in snug red velvet and furred accents to bring attention to the cleavage her mother preferred covered up. "Super Potato, in Tokyo. We'll have it. I'll call." Nia winked at Sophie. "I've secured that Atari system you wanted. Dari. Sophie hadn't spoken the words, or maybe she had. A mocking waft of his wife's perfume flagged him. The signature sweet pea scent he'd commissioned for Sophie was still her favorite. She hadn't replaced it. Or him. Not yet. "Ship the game," he told Nia without explaining who she was to Sophie. Talk of family would only disgust her. Meanwhile, Darius was disgusted with thoughts of Morgan, a roach that would get a Merry Christmas if only Darius's phone would ring. "You have the address," Darius said with emphasis. "Why, yes, I do," Nia said with a smirk. Sophie fluffed her hair, a sure sign of agitation. Another waft of sweet pea filled his head. How long had it been since he held her? 6 months? 6 months, 4 days, and just as many hours? His eyes closed of their own accord. He sucked in more of what he loved. He'd apologize 1,000 times over if that would fix their marriage. But showing Sophie was better than words. Actions. He hoped she'd take his in proper context, provided he got the chance to act. He willed his smartphone to ring as the brother and sister at the counter scrambled past him. "Excuse us, again," the mother said over her sleeping infant. "You're fine," Sophie mumbled. She crouched with a smile, only to pop up with a candy cane rattle in her hand. "You dropped this." Jingles accompanied her setting the toy inside the bulky carrier, despite Sophie being the bluest of the blue. "Add $1,000 to my bill. A finder's fee," Darius told Nia about the Atari game to get his wife off track. Sophie made no mention of his excess, something she used to ride him about. "Sweet baby," she sighed. "Yes," he agreed. "May I give you a lift?" The heavy snow would make it harder to find a cab, and he needed his wife to smile, even if she hated him. "Is the limo circling the block?" "Where else would it be?" "Darius." "We can talk Sega games and what you're doing for the holidays," he pressed. Sophie may forget about Fiji if Darius got her in small spaces where they could really talk. Christmas was hell for both of them. "I'll help with your fund if I can." "You'll invest? Now?" "Why not? Darius asked, despite her blast of frustrated breath. It was better for Andino Group to dive in than invite Morgan's predatory practices. The thought of that grabby hands anywhere near Sophie was a stake to Darius's already bleeding heart, and his blasted phone refused to ring. Just sign the papers and we're good, she said. I don't need you, and you don't need me. He swallowed as she straightened his collar. I still love you, Fifi. It's Sophie, and love is a drug, Darius, an addiction. Just say no. She brushed his cheek with the lightest kiss. It's over. I'll courier over another. Hold that thought. His phone buzzed and he answered to keep from saying something he'd regret. Merry Christmas, she said, and brushed past him. Chapter 3. The Hibiscus Sarong. So, you are meeting someone said. Sophie jerked up from her laptop. She snagged an earbud on the armrest. Pardon? She said at last. A redhead wearing a bikini top and hibiscus sarong glanced across the aisle of the Sikorsky helicopter. Her satisfied giggle, 1 part excitement, 3 parts coconut cocktails, matched her rosy glow. There's a boat. You're meeting someone, she said as Sophie pulled out the other earbud. Christmas in the Fijian archipelago. So many islands, so many options. Yes, the perfect getaway. Enjoying yours already? Sophie said, not unkindly. She did harbor resentment, though. Every female who, in Sophie's mind, seemed capable of bearing a child was an object of upset. Silly, but that was the reality surrounding frustrated fertility. No offense, she added to fill the silence. None taken. The chatty traveler lifted her glass. Flights leave me anxious. So does marriage. 23 days, 2.5 hours plus change. Her giddy brown eyes shifted from Sophie to the island-sized diamond on her slim ring finger. Sophie's never felt so bare. Congratulations, and me too if I'm being honest, about the nervous part. Marriage hadn't frightened her until she'd tried it, but marrying an extended family and ancient history wasn't quite the same, especially when that history would end with you. You're single then? Yep. Dating? Sophie nipped her lower lip and gave her head a slow shake. Absolutely not. Is that why you focus so tightly on whatever it is you're doing? The bride asked. Work gets me through. Me too. At least it used to. The redhead beamed. What do you do? Hedge fund management. Sophie loved talking about her fund, but wondered if the woman was just being kind. Go on, please. I want to hear about it. I'm pulling investors into a new financial plan, she said. It's an impact fund designed to increase positive change. Clean energy, water, renewable building supplies, and profit. Sophie added with a duh shrug that went over well. She enjoyed her work, but not everyone was on board. Sounds exciting. It is. Thanks. Sophie retrieved a business card and handed it over. She doubted the 30-something in Bermuda shorts and a matching hibiscus shirt dozing beside his bride would abide work-related activities. Not on his honeymoon. The dude was a tanned lion with a mane of sandy hair. He set his paw hand over his wife, and Sophie's heart doubled up. The couple probably made love before boarding the helicopter. Heated kisses, hungry hands, and with nothing on the brain but each other. No business, no babies, no family. Sophie smiled off further talk. Newlywed contentment was too much, and they'd land soon, so she stowed her earbuds. The bride's makeup would melt, much like the honeymoon flush, despite valiant efforts. Not a mean thought, just the reality check Sophie needed to balance her out. She chose to meet Morgan au naturel, although she'd brought her pink cosmetic case. A false front came in handy at times. The case had become more of an insurance policy. Yet Chapter 4. I'm Here for Morgan. Darius prayed. He begged for a Merry Christmas for Sophie and himself while sea spray flew on either side of the boat. The Formula 310 safety glass, sleek, angled, and reflecting baking rays, protected him and the man he'd roped into driving him out from the worst of the wet, although Darius could use a cooling. Morgan's love shack, masked inside a deserted aisle with resort potential, awaited. An odd choice for a meeting, considering Morgan had another hotel nearby. Isolation could only mean one thing. The one thing Sophie wouldn't allow, but may have difficulty fending off. With the great pain in her heart, she might do things she'd regret. Darius wished she regretted leaving him, but protecting her came first, whatever her sentiments. Jungle greens, blazing white shores, tranquil lagoons, and rocky outbanks took fast form. Peaceful enough if one looked to the swoop of seabirds. They glided in off sapphire waters, wings spread without a care. Still, his brows bunched. Muscles knotted while his skin quivered with anticipated fallout. Good, bad, potentially deadly if Sophie could get the drop on him. The latter was preferable to her walking away. Walking away after she'd righted his collar in Gamer's Grotto and told him what a drug love was. Talk about bait. And competing for Morgan's business, something he'd never wanted, was just the line Darius needed to retrieve his marriage. Sophie's mind was her greatest asset. That and the impassioned heart that thundered to speeds he admired more than matched. But a man like Morgan cared more for packaging. Tearing it off. Sophie must be desperate to come this far. As leagues fell away, he framed his forehead between thumb and forefinger and refused to wonder at what could have happened. What still may happen if his plan failed. Surrounded by water, Sophie's biggest bugaboo, if she'd been honest when confessing after his freak-out about spiders, she would have to wait with Darius. And he would take whatever time it took Morgan to shake the drag Darius placed on him and work with her. Work things out, he wished. Sophie was all he wanted for Christmas, and more. If only she'd believe him. The boat beneath skipped waves while the helicopter Sophie was scheduled to arrive in spiraled upward. It reached altitude in a whipping of palm fronds and an inquisitive turn of Sophie's head. It looked like her. He squinted and watched as she hunkered slightly, a hand clapped to her flopping hat. The helipad constructed beyond the approaching pier lent the distance required to camouflage the who inside the boat, and that was all for the good. Speed gave way to careful navigation, and Darius kept his head low, pulling down his own hat to prevent discovery. A similar build and a drive to win were the only things Darius and Morgan had in common. Sophie, hands still holding her hat in place, wearing face-shading glasses and the purse she never left home without, trotted toward the pier. As always, she had a sweater wrapped around her midsection. Her sandaled feet, so petite, the left one supporting a sparkling anklet, dug into the sand as she walked. What bags she'd brought lay stacked on the periphery of the helipad. Sophie never traveled light, although she may have planned to remain far longer than any presentation required. "Shall I wait?" the captain asked Darius, who was the only crew member. A territorial jolt rocked him from head to heels. "Do that, and I'll ensure you lose your captain's credentials." "Aye, aye, Mr. Andino. But hurry. I can't leave your wife stranded if she asks me to take her back to civilization." "Fine. Not fine. She is your wife." Darius collected his backpack and stepped onto the built-in seating along the boat's edge. When they neared the pier, he hopped from boat to undulating wood. The captain downshifted, turned, and sped off while Darius waited as long as possible. He twisted to watch the boat's departure and willed Sophie to believe he was Morgan. Anyone but himself, the one man that Sophie would reject, even if he were the last male on Earth. Mr. Morgan, thank you for meeting me. Her light call, professional yet still exuding personal, came close. Closer when she said, I appreciate you making time when we both know you'd prefer Aspen. Here it comes. Sweet pea perfume and a volcanic blast that may give rise to another island chain. Darius turned. She flicked her hair and thrust a hand forward, so confident until realization immobilized her. You! She whipped off her sunglasses. It's wonderful seeing you again. Seeing me? Try sabotaging me? Stalking me? Making me wish I'd dropped out of college, let alone taken that damned internship? You're certifiable. She crammed sunglasses in her purse and tore off her hat to swat him with it. She'd done the same with the hairy spider that crawled out of her purse as she'd waited in the foyer of Andino HQ so long ago. She'd been so full of herself, so incredibly naive about what she would or wouldn't do on a personal level. Darius had been the same. But predicting trends by numbers, not instinct, would make him billions, she'd assured him. If only he took a chance and opened his mind. Darius had opened more than his mind to his would-be intern-going warrior woman with a rolled-up magazine on the offending arachnid. It was instinct about the cute quant that urged him on. She whacked him again, in real time, hissing curses. You're... I'm eccentric, he supplied. He snatched her hat and scowled. But I'm no bug. That is too rude. She gulped, then shouted at the frothing sea. Come back here. I'll sue. Sue who? It's Christmas time, Darius said. The boatman is speeding toward friends and family, no doubt. Well, we're neither, she raged. Not friends and not family, as far as I'm concerned. So where does that leave me? You're in a prime position to show the impact of your impact fund, he said. Her stone-silent, think-again expression would make him smile if they were anywhere else. I'm interested to see what you've put together. She lifted her chin, clutched her purse to her chest, and stalked past him onto a handy sandbar. Darius gaped. He clapped a hand to his forehead, then followed. Sea foam sloshed and her toes and ankles got more than wet. She'd nearly convinced him that she'd overcome her phobia when the whimper came. It wasn't too loud, but loud enough. Cross-currents rushed out beneath them. She wobbled but kept walking forward in modest shorts. Get back here, he called. Riptides were dangerous, and she had zero practical experience. Grabbing her may end with her intentionally drowning herself to avoid him. Your days of directing are over, she called shakily. Sure, fine, but the boat is gone, Darius said coolly, despite the tension seizing him. There's no sense drowning yourself. Morgan will be here soon. Unless Nia managed his competition into a tighter corner than Darius imagined. His aunt may wish her daughter was on lockdown, but Nia was a weapon to be deployed, and not in uptown game stores. Sophie was a wounded warrior fighting herself, and that had to stop. The tide rose higher. He cleared his throat. Your presentation will shine compared to the dinosaur in my backpack, he said to reach her logical side. In reality, Darius had thrown together something sure to turn Morgan's stomach and get Sophie thinking. The male birth control pill that supposedly needed funding for further development was a dual-action miracle. A single pill would prevent unwanted pregnancy for a full month, while squelching the overactive libido that humiliated many. Why don't I believe you? She called with another wobble. Get back here, he growled. Sophie complied after another spray of foam soaked her shorts. Thank God, he breathed. Sign the papers, she growled in his face. She snatched her hat back and stalked to shore with a sick look directed at the wet. Then we'll see what happens. Cash flow could happen, he rushed to say in her wake. There's no need to become the entertainment while others clean up our clients. The strap of her purse fell, and he rushed to retrieve it, rubbing damp sand off before tucking it back between her and the purse. Our clients? She repeated with a disgusted huff. Those we could divide between us if we worked like opposite sides of a coin. An unspoken partnership. That was better than none, Darius thought. We don't have to be a couple to make money together. You work the forward thinkers, I'll work the rest. Her shoulders dropped a hair while her chin lifted. You mean that? Darius steadied himself against the nearness of soft, creamy skin and a fine bone structure calling for close study. We always complemented one another, and you killed all the creepy crawlers. He flashed her with wide eyes and dark lashes. Unfair, but this was war. Too bad he hadn't yielded the battle over saving the world before today. It may have saved his marriage. You should cut me a check, she said, or some slack since I never charged for pest control. You're generous, Sophie, so why stop now? Offer your clients greater options, more opportunity outside singular ventures that, noble as they are, can be risky. Man has been seeking a faster, better way to make saltwater drinkable since time began. Impact investing covers so much more. She moved past his eyes to check out his linen-covered chest. Teach me, he crooned. Funny, that's what Morgan said. Is that so? Darius stuffed anger and forced a laugh. Let's find this retreat house so we can mitigate the heat or at least slip into something more comfortable. Sweet pea perfume caught the breeze, much like Sophie's heavy-lidded inspection, crystal blue and hinting wickedness. A can of Raid is all the comfort you'll get, she said with a gulp. You're a traditional man, but even in drag, your intentions would be clear as... Never mind. I rarely mind, but a man can't help what he is or where his tastes run. Well, you'd better. I'm here for Morgan. Chapter 5. Play, Merman. Here for Morgan? Sophie withered inside. Had she actually said that? She turned her back on Darius's penetrating eyes with the fabulous lashes and counted her blessings. Keying on Darius's wounded ego would get her nowhere. Besides, she had much to be thankful for. The helicopter had landed safely and not in the ocean. Her little dip was more than enough to shiver her skin, and Morgan, despite his delay, was en route. He was determined, too, if she knew her target. Sophie had her presentation secured in her luggage stacked by the helipad. She may have another new client, too. Kendra seemed willing and able despite her obvious honeymoon haze. The bride may be a worthy replacement if Morgan took issue with Sophie passing on the pass he was sure to make. And Darius, a test of her resolve, hated bugs. That was another blessing in the making if Santa knew his business. An army of hulking and hairy crawlers would show up sooner or later. Lush green leaves, rambling brush, and flowering vines hid an assortment of unknowns snickering like laughing hyenas, no doubt. Did they have hyenas in Fiji? Who knew? Who cared? Sophie needed hand in this situation, leverage beyond flagging mottos of moving on. She preferred men the way Darius hated his bugs, you see. Furry, bold, unpredictable, yet petrified beneath that godlike exterior. Darius was all she'd wanted. She'd always responded to a deep-timbered voice. Devotion to family was another plus, in theory. The same family that recalled her shortfall was nowhere in sight. Nana had been suspiciously hard to get a hold of, too. Sophie's grandmother had lived with the couple before abruptly admitting herself into the nursing care system. Why had she done that? What had changed outside Sophie's inability to carry a child to term? She had trouble enough just getting pregnant and having Nana on site. Well, Sophie's brows twisted. She glared at Darius. He kicked a boat shoe against the sand, seemingly awaiting her instruction. What had he said to Nana? Sophie peered past him to the sea, willing another boat to appear. She trained her ears for the sound of another helicopter. Where was Morgan? Why had Nana left for an old folks' home? Sophie swiped knuckles across her brow when Darius took action. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. Her husband stripped off wind-blown linen. "What does it look like?" "You said you'd like being civil, so cut the trolling." "Trolling?" he answered back with an infuriating pucker. "I'm attempting to stay cool." "Seriously?" she snapped when he reached for his waistband. His puppy pout nearly melted her. "What?" he said. "Restrain yourself." "But I'm dying here." "Go for a swim then. Indulge yourself," she said. She needed distance, and he needed a cold shower. The glint of the single gold chain he wore accented furred terrain. "Join me," he said. Those carpet lashes dipped and lifted. "You're asking me to swim? Me?" Attraction tugged her like a Mars-sized magnet on a helpless paperclip, but resistance was all she'd allow. The look on his face conveyed too clearly that he was reading the look on hers. Water was hell, but having Dari's arms around her, well. "Why not you?" he asked. "You've overcome your aversion, obviously, so you know the water's fine." The water was fine, but they weren't discussing water. His wink reminded her of not-so-hidden dangers, the temperature, but not the great expanse that might suck her under. Muscles or sea made little difference. She refused temptation and Dari's able hands. Good grief. There she went, referring to Darius as Dari, her name for him, or so she'd thought. Sophie should thank that bombshell from the game store. One desperate dip in fine water was enough. And what if she fell off the sandbar? What if currents pulled her under like the recurring dream that she'd lived ever since Nana insisted she examine sea urchins up close and personal? That last childhood getaway stuck with her, and not because that's when Nana stopped being Nana. Losing Granddad had that effect. Losing Darius. Sophie sucked her cheeks and dismissed comparison. Sophie let her husband go. Divorce wasn't death. She shook her head and pulled away from inviting fingers, lifted and too close to touching. A rescue scenario featuring mouth-to-mouth made her shake. She slapped a mosquito looking to make a meal of her forearm, thankful that the rest seemed put off by the Mosey X repellent pill she'd gulped before leaving the helicopter. "Well?" he goaded. She gave her head another shake and pulled strands of hair that stuck to her mouth. The warm wind tousled his hair, too, still thick and glossy and iced with the lightest touch of silver. Why couldn't she have his baby? Just one. Two, maybe. "You're cold?" Darius would notice her shiver. "I'm ticked off at Morgan. He's late, and I'm cranky." Both true. "Go ahead, swim. Play merman if you must. I'll work off my mad on hiking through that mess." She turned toward the jungle, and thankfully, what looked like a wooden post, weathered by how many storms and a tide that could rise as high as the sky in her imagination. "You're not going in there alone. If you're ready to move, I'll bring your bags." Darius bolted in the helipad's direction before she could argue, showing off like traditional men did when attempting to woo whatever it is they wanted. The change came once they secured their woman. Sophie focused on pushing through leg-swiping foliage. If she wrapped this up, leveraging Morgan's tardiness, her putting up with his having invited Darius, she could leave. She could present to the newlyweds and snatch another client. Darius muscled up her luggage and picked up the pace beside her, her backhanding of an overhang of vines snagging her hat. "Thank you." Sophie caught herself ogling his legs again. "So we're competing on this one." "If it pleases you to think we're rivals, then yes," Sophie said. He'd think what he wanted anyway. Darius's grin, pearly white and reliable as waves lapping the shore, goaded her. He was a shark, like she'd said. The Greek was predatory when it came to work and women. He'd been more than exclusive when it came to her, but his cooing at Gamer's Grotto said that was at an end. He was psyching her out to get to Morgan. That had to be it. The billionaire Greek had accumulated his wealth by way of silent stalking. He only rose from the depths when someone else's hard effort led them to believe they'd scored a meal. Head tripping was his specialty. That's why she was struggling with tingling skin and eyes that refused to stay in her head. She'd not only been sharked, but psychoanalyzed for the purpose of exploitation. But who cared? She was screaming inside, from the depths of her desert-dry mouth to her touch my toes and everywhere else. A shriek sounded in the overhead canopy. Sophie startled. Her hat tumbled along with her spirits. Dear God, that sounds like a child, she breathed. So says anyone plagued by the Matamanoa bird. A what? She demanded. The thing shrieked again, a haunting wail, and Sophie licked her lower lip to regain herself. Maternal instincts flooded her every sense, despite the incongruity of instinct run amok. Are you sure? She asked. She retrieved her hat, slapped it on, and contemplated downsizing the contents of her purse as the heavy bag swung to one side. Sounds like a baby to me. Mating season began in November. This is December. Yes, but the poor birds will keep at it through January most likely. A full 3 months. Great, she huffed, feeling the opposite. Had Darius been to Fiji before? During mating season, if not, how would he know about Momo birds? The man was no naturalist. It will be a long night, he said. Our feathered friends are nocturnal, and if this fellow is up, he'll spur competition. Not the kind I prefer, she snapped. Her skin itched. And that's not my kind of clubhouse. What was Morgan thinking? Darius trudged ahead, dropped her bags, and grunted at the shack. Tiny, made of palm, and with one wall crumbled to invite all that Fiji offered. But that may be all we've got if our client doesn't hightail it to this meeting. I'm sorry, Sophie. He sounded distressed. Darius even rubbed his neck, wrung it more likely, and kicked the dirt again. But Sophie suspected he was anything but put off. That bare chest was too tanned and happily exposed. Another Momo joined the chorus. Sophie cringed. Long night, you think? Chapter 6. The Biggest Stick. It'll be all right, Sophie. Darius wouldn't permit anything less. His creation of their predicament was the most proprietary information he'd ever possessed. Mating birds called out, and he ground his teeth. You'll see. What he saw in himself was a lack of foresight. Gee, where have I heard that before? When he'd told Sophie that they'd conceive again, they'd lost one child, their only one, via ectopic pregnancy. No need to canvass that history. Her stiff lips communicated recollection without a sound. Their most exquisite joy had grown inside her, inside them both, it seemed, utterly innocent. And yet their baby destroyed half of Sophie, organs and spirit, before he or she whisked away. The bond between husband and wife siphoned like sand. Trust me, please. He needed that so badly it hurt. You've said that, too. Far too many times. But it's okay. She licked her teeth and captured strands of wayward hair in a repeated motion he recognized as self-soothing. We'll get through this easy peasy. I will. I'm here to help. She smirked. Are you? Always. No truer words were ever spoken. She had to know it, even without the surety he attempted to convey with looks alone. He knew better than to touch even the edge of her sweater. They may not reconcile today, but better memories would go far to repairing them both, even if they only remained friends. A state he wasn't certain he could live with. I'll never stop caring, he choked out. I could say something. Say whatever it is. We're alone here. Without accommodations. Love is a drug, Darius. Like I said. Better to move on. But stranded, sticky, and she tugged her hat. That's a virus. Something to endure until it passes, no matter what we care about. Or who. So I'm a sickness? She couldn't mean that. You're you. Her simple statement, followed up by a shrug, drilled him better than the mosquitoes that typically preferred Sophie. What is that supposed to mean? That she had repellent for blood? A lover? Another bird cleared its lungs, and they both startled. Shut up, you, he growled at the canopy overhead, and turned on his wife. Now please, explain yourself. Maybe he'd mistaken her leaving him for frustration over their inability to have children. He peered into those unblinking eyes, and no. He shook his head, more in his mind than anything, but Sophie still challenged him with an upturned chin. Morgan was not her type, an out and proud womanizer. Yet Sophie was far from frigid. Sophie was quick, creative, and passionate, in the office and out. Everything he'd ever hoped for. One reason he'd waited to marry until he found the woman, or she found him. Sophie had answered his ad for interns. What is it? She'd always loved pegging him with questions instead of answering. You can't call me a disease and then say nothing, could she? Let's leave it there if we hope to maintain this truce, she spoke serenely enough, but calm was often her way of masking the opposite. That made two of them, since Darius learned long ago that giving way to anger only stripped him of control, of himself or the situation. I'm heading deeper in the jungle. There has to be something around here. Another bird screeched, and she shouted, Are they going to go at it all night? Darius let her entree go. Sexual innuendo and talk of mating birds was not what she needed. Not with unshed tears transforming her eyes into gleaming pools. Blue enough to shame the ocean. They'd just left, and him too. And here he'd nearly convinced himself she might have taken a lover. Don't go too far, he cautioned. How could I? We don't have a machete unless you brought the one I'm still convinced you'd prefer in my back, or my fund. She didn't trust him, and so be it. Call if you need me. I won't. Putting distance between them, she shucked off her sweater and threw it toward the luggage she restacked neatly. Food, water, and a semblance of shelter are what they required. He'd gut the bungalow and make the best for both of them. If Morgan's detour went as planned, Darius would have a full 24 hours to transform his wife from disinterested to desirous. Of whatever he could provide, adequate shelter was a start. There may be a nearby stream or something, she called. Hear that? Yes, he said, even though his hearing was limited to the thunder of wind through the trees overhead. Water must be close. Fresh, or else this hut wouldn't make sense. Sense has nothing to do with today. He turned her a look. It'll be over soon, like a 24-hour flu. She stalked into the brush before he could get a read on what appeared to be a playful expression. Her silhouette slipped in and out of glossy foliage, and Darius turned to task. Fallen palms, a filthy cot, an upturned table, and dirt met him on the inside of the hut. Hot, sticky, and far from romantic. Okay. He had the skills to turn the situation around. Fishing, frying his catch on an open flame, skills his wife knew little about. Too much talk of Mathraki saw her tune out. She wouldn't tonight, only if out of necessity. He'd fix a meal beyond her imagining, and they'd have to drown out the squawking somehow. Talking was only one suggestion that crossed his mind. The prelude to other things, he hoped, clutching up a load of palms. Things she still may entertain despite his being a squeal, not a squawk cut through the humidity. Sophie? He swapped palms for the biggest stick he could find and dashed outside. Sophie, I'm coming. Great. We have company. Sophie thanked God instead of cursing like she typically did when something or someone interrupted quiet time with Darius. Hairy legs spread, ready to rumble, and waving a stick, he looked hilarious. The sadness tugging at her evaporated. She really should try to be civil and have mercy on him. "What? Where?" he demanded. "Are you all right?" She took in the visual of her big, brave protector, then stabbed a finger toward fire-red pom-pom flowers. Tangerine, really, surrounded by deep jungle green. "Over there. Your bird pals apparently called for backup to take up ground assault. I see nothing." Because he needed glasses but refused them. "Look closer." She took his hand, flapped her free one until he lowered his stick, and walked him toward the bushes like the guide he needed. "See? Those chunky green guys over there. They startled me, but they're harmless. Scaly, spiny, and likely more frightened than they were, a clutch of iguanas winked up at them. Just under that bough. Darius jumped, and so did she, thanks to him. Harmless? He breathed. Okay, he saw them now. Yes. You're perfectly safe, Dari. The nickname slipped out, and with it, the mental image of Mrs. Santa in the game store. Sophie tugged his arm, attempting to ignore the firm feel of it while putting matters in perspective. "What are you doing?" "Showing you it really is all right. Enough was enough. Those are deadly. One drop of saliva, one scratch, and we're..." He spun around and roped her in his arms. Strong and warm and... Darius shifted to stand in front of her, his back to her front. He hooked an arm behind her, splayed fingers snugging her close like an iron band in reverse. They weren't spooning, exactly, but close enough. He craned his head around, and her hat tipped off. The scent of him, bergamot, patchouli, and a dash of rose, filled her head. An undernote of pure male, potent and potentially dangerous, forced a shudder she hadn't felt in months. Years. Merry Christmas. Chapter 7. The Cretan Bull. Sophie channeled mildness, where she stood trembling in her husband's awkward embrace. A volcano quaked beneath her slick skin. She needed to regain control and end this conflict with Darius. Divorce papers may get signed, and then what? If she still felt something for him, like she was at the moment, she'd be lost. "Let go," she said, "and get a grip." Darius tightened his hold. "Darius!" Sophie was shocked and more than shivery. "In a minute," he said. He scooted backward, casting thunderbolts at the brush line. He raised his stick. Objections rose to Sophie's mind, but she stuffed them. Meeting his split-second glance, she owned the truth. She loved her husband's overblown protectiveness. She wanted Darius to touch her. He must know, considering she wasn't slapping him off. This wasn't victim-shaming, not at all, she told herself. Sophie wasn't a victim. She could get away from her husband, scream, but his warm, muscled arms satisfied the cravings that had her wanting to produce little Greek gods and goddesses in the first place. "Those animals are devils," he said with a rough voice to slay her defenses. Darius was the devil, and Sophie refused to subject herself to further temptation. Head games had gone far enough. "Hands off, now," she insisted before she exploded. He dropped his hold. His eyes misted. Was he wounded or worried? She didn't care. Sophie shouldn't care, and yet his puppy dog look worked its magic. Her insides twisted with more want than she wanted. Soothing what irked him had been one of her greatest joys, but the cost of joy was too high. Strengthened, she moved toward the thicket. "No, don't," he cautioned. "It's not worth the risk." "What risk?" "There may be some flesh-eating beast in there." Sophie ignored him. Distance is what she needed, and exactly what she couldn't have on this blasted island. She ached to have his hands on her. She craved more than hands, and far more than the desperate coupling that would likely result if she gave him the slightest green light. Darius jumped in front of her. Monsters hunt in packs. His wide eyes, furious and fantastic, sought hers. Who was afraid now? Sophie's shivers shivered. Her husband was a total ham, but his excess bravado filled those gaps. Sophie felt too keenly. Energy crackled between them, but too bad. She gave her head a shake to stave off the fluffy-headed effects. "Don't be ridiculous," she choked. She was speaking to herself, obviously, and she'd better. Giving in to animal instinct is what got her into this ill-fated love connection. She whisked the remnants of his fingerprints off her flesh, like that was possible. Need surged like a raging tide of, please, no. But logic came too late. Her engines were fired. Darius was already ready. What now? The ruined hut or anywhere moderately accommodating would be welcome with her insides jellying. She'd suffered the same malady, tossing ethics aside when she'd discovered Darius got scared at scary movies. 2 coworkers discussing business over dinner, then taking in a movie, and it was time she dropped the benefit of the doubt. "You're setting me up," she accused. "That has to be it." "It? Stop it." "To what purpose?" he croaked. "Why would I set you up?" "A gentleman's agreement? A family bet?" she suggested. His face paled enough to indicate something wasn't right. She retrieved her hat and punched out the crushed dome. "I don't manage your affairs. I never had one of those. Never. And you never considered one, I'm sure," she growled. The man was turning her into the thought police. "Never. Never is a long time, and we all have them. Thoughts," she clarified. He was obviously projecting about her meeting with Morgan, as if that would ever happen. Darius puffed his chest like the biggest iguana. "Your mother's nymph parades are notorious," she said. "Obnoxious. They are cousins. Nobody has that much family." Still, Sophie had to wonder if his mother's entertaining every goddess and her nymph friend was the reason Darius was here instead of home in the bosom of his loving clan. The rims of her eyes stung. She dashed fingers across her cheeks to remove any wet that may have found its way there. "You don't believe me?" he said. "I'm infertile, not blind." Although she could be projecting too. Not that it hurt any less. Sophie hated being unable to function like a woman. Not something she'd ever say to someone else in her situation. She was speaking nonsense. So why was she beating herself up? Why did Darius have to hang his head? Her heart seized and bled and... No. Believing the worst of Darius made giving him the space needed to get over her, over their loss and her lack, easier. "Is that what this is about?" he demanded. "You believe I'd cheat?" Birds wailed overhead, and she was so done. But where to go? "You think I want some baby machine over you?" he whispered against her silence. "My lawfully wedded wife? My better half?" He slammed his stick on the dirt, and she shuddered. "You're my heart, Sophie, the pumping of my blood, yet you deprive us both." Her face flamed, and what hand she'd gained over him slapped her silly. "I think for us," she said upon recovery. "Someone has to. Logically, statistically, and with our best interests in mind instead of moments that pass. We make life out of moments, not statistics. Well, you've horned in on this moment, like the Cretan bull from that perverted myth with the poor Greek girl you told me about. Your women need to watch out for anything with a pulse. So you love me?" She wove her arms across her midsection and sighed. "I care. Disordered as that is. Reason would return and cool the rest. But you care nothing for Morgan's money or rescuing indigenous iguanas from the invasion of the American horde." "Horde?" He cast a glance over his shoulder. "Those monsters are iguanas, not Komodo dragons. Though I'm surprised you didn't cancel my Awesome Planet subscription." That must be how he learned so much and so little all at once. They're harmless, but invasive, and doing a job on the locals. So was Darius's swarthy everything, delightfully dark, muscled, and dusted with hair that made hers stand on end. "Why are you here?" she asked at last. "Why are you?" Outrage turned his ears a satisfying red. He was angry now, and she'd take that over lazy baiting any day. Does a legitimate business proposal require a trip halfway around the world? It can. With Morgan? Why do you care? I want details, not empty declarations. He'd let her go. It could be competition making him act so crazy. And no mention of love had been made until he discovered she was heading to Fiji. "Why are you thinking the worst of me?" he demanded. "It's not the worst. It just is. Now I need to clean up. Makeup may not last, but the ritual would soothe her. Morgan will be here any moment. Then we can all get out of here. With or without money. It wasn't worth it." The confusion on her husband's face was her fault, just like their inability to have a baby. Certainly not the Christmas fun some predicted. "All get out of here?" "Think again," Darius said to himself. "If Morgan dared to show up, he may never leave the island. 6 feet under was more likely." Darius knew himself. He understood his wife, and hot is what she was. She was steaming from the heat, sure, but the issues she refused to explore, foolish insecurity, needed clearing up. She may walk away from him in the end. Darius may end up signing her damned papers, but not without a fight. The shack awaited like a true mercy case. The mess offered him the chance to vent. He whipped up palms, twigs, and more palms. He choked the stalks with twitchy fingers while his jaw clenched tight, his heart even tighter. They'd lost a child. It happened. They weren't so different from other couples. They could work if they worked together. Sophie, for all his hoping, didn't want that. His family was an excuse. Real enough, but if Sophie loved him, if she wanted him, she'd stay. The splash of water he'd failed to pick up earlier filled his ears. Every hint of his wife's being with him, here and now, would take on meaning for the rest of his life. Agony or the opposite. He had a choice, even if he rejected the avoidance she proposed. Another crash of ruined foliage filled his hand, and the machete, Sophie hoped for, appeared beneath the mess, rusted and ready to use. He threw the load out the wall-sized window and picked up the knife to test the edge with his thumb. If this was their final Christmas together, he'd make sure it was one she'd never regret. Chapter 8. Droom Droom. An hour or more passed, taking Darius's foul mood with it. The sun sunk lower, and he caught himself humming, then singing, "Droom, droom, droom." Happiness, good food, and humor is what Sophie needed. Him too. She used to enjoy his folk songs before she came to dislike everything about him. Feeding her always fed his soul. And while this was no Manhattan dinner date, she'd be pleased. That was the least he could give her, if only to replace other memories that tore at him too. Soon enough, arms loaded, the machete in his grip, he headed toward the water. What rustling he'd heard Sophie make stopped, and he kept on singing. She cleared her throat. "What are you doing?" "Preparing lunch." "Dinner, really." "Droom, droom, droom," he sang with gusto. "I don't mind the singing, but something else, please. Or do you want me to fall into the water?" "Of course not." His slow smile felt right. "Why would I want that?" Sophie recalling the lyrics about a maiden with jangling bracelets falling into the village well was good enough. So was the flash of Sophie's gleaming anklet. "If I do, you will fish me out, and I will not marry you," she said in reference to the bargain proposed by the hero of the song. His smile vanished. I would rescue you either way. Really? She peered over the boulder where she'd set up her makeup case and hair things, like a rabbit expecting the worst. Water was okay in smaller doses, apparently, and so was Darius. Yet there was nothing small about the swell of his heart as she stroked lotion against her bare neck, her white blonde hair streaming against perfect skin. The steady current rushing inside the graveled inlet beside them said she was more into making a point. One he'd better not notice, or she would know he could see her, rock or no rock. And the view was more than he deserved. He cleared his throat to strain away excess emotion. We have mangoes, bananas, and guava. I'm not hungry. Another attempt at scoring and needless deprivation. You're welcome, and you will be. Trust me in this. Food cures a great many ills, says the man from the supersized family. I doubt you've ever been stranded in your life. That's just it. A Greek is never alone, even when he is, and certainly not in the presence of an omorphikyria, beautiful woman, he translated even though she knew what the words meant, before their first date. Always with the Greek talk. It's all right to admit you like it. The language, culture, the epic poetry. He stood up from where he split figs with his thumbs. My family, too. She had very much at the beginning, believing his mother the sweetest woman. Sophie stabbed him with winking sapphire eyes, and Darius flushed. The rock blocked the more earthy aspects of what drew him to this one-time intern, but they'd always connected on many levels. A constant striving for personal bests made them natural companions. Have you picked up the Smithsonian streaming service? I miss our talks, he said, and her sloping shoulders, and the hollow of her throat, and he exhaled to contain himself. I'm sorry about being harsh earlier. She caught her lower lip with perfect white teeth and peered further around the rock. How is your family? Expanding? Demanding? The same. Good. Darius whirled and she clutched a yellow top to her chin. Explain. You said you always liked me. His intimate issues with well-intended prying and poking were no secret, even if he tried to speak kindly. Love had its price. I do, and I like your family too. She shrugged a soft shoulder, from a distance. That makes two of us, though I hope my nearness doesn't offend you. His eyelashes took a slow ride down, and he couldn't help it. Sophie was cramming forever in a split second. No, not at all, she said in a throaty tone that would lay him flat if he let it. I'm glad you're here. Alone isn't something I do well, and you do have quite the singing voice. Wonderful. Let's eat. You look refreshed. To say appetizing would be stupid. He wasn't that, and yet he felt like it, having been so easily enticed. Give me a minute. Darius would give her more than a minute. Sophie knew. All night, all week. Darius, still shirtless and stunning, would offer his life, sacrificed on a satin pillow if she gave the slightest hint of wanting it. He would forego the child she knew he craved, even more than she did. His increased tenderness in the aftermath of her failed pregnancy proved it. His deference to her, the compassionate caring, and his overabundant assurances that she should trust him, and sweet Christmas. Sophie trusted him. He'd earned her confidence. He'd cared too, and she cared too much to tie him to a situation with no hope for his dreams to be realized. That's what she was supposed to think. That's what the numbers would indicate if she put on her analyst's cap and projected futures, minus a tricky little thing called love. Right now, with the sun sinking, desire caught her out. Darius understood her too well, even when she wasn't playing Mrs. Frosty. She slipped on a ribbed yellow tank and a matching sarong with a light floral motif. It was an outfit that Darius would love, if only because it was feminine. She wanted to please him too. How feminine and predictable was that? But Darius was looking long before he'd acknowledged checking out what Santa brought. Sophie dragged a brush through her hair. Each exaggerated stroke stoked her fires. His gaze hit her like a tease of fingers and impassioned exhales. Any woman with half a hormone would kill to draw his brand of attention. He tried to hide by tending meal preparations, as if fruit was all he wanted. He fooled nobody, and neither did she. Food was foreplay, and not just for sex. He'd courted her in a similar fashion, her mind mostly. Sophie had never been tended, taken by storm, and cared for with such abundance. His ministrations scared her then, and they did now. Idols weren't real. She should know better than to incite the worship that nearly ruined her, and yet she drew out every motion of her body for his pleasure. Instinct dictated what she needed to be whole. Being close to rushing water outside a porcelain bathroom never felt so natural. That was a healing of some sort, considering how she felt about wet things. Who knew where tonight would lead? What would happen off the island? She pretended awkwardness again, offering him a pout over her shoulder. Darius blushed. Heat crept up her skin. A smile curled her lips, but she fought it, licking them instead. Some women faked other things with their men, but Darius always delivered. No trouble in that department. Her proud Greek husband pleased her first in all things. "Are you almost done over there?" he said. "Bananas are waiting." "I'll bet they are." She smiled at his loaded invitation. "I have to put up my hair." Not the style Darius preferred, but necessary if she didn't want to jump the shark, as the saying went, although he might jump her. Was that all he wanted for Christmas? What was she doing? She bent over, twisted her hair, straightened and reached for her tortoise-shell clip. The spring jammed, so she power-gripped the flared edges and plastic sprang from her hand. With a twist, she reached out and her elbow whacked the pink makeup case she'd propped on the rock. Luggage flew. "Damn it," she shouted. Darius ate up paces to the water's edge, stripped off cargo shorts, and dove in the river. He caught up her hair clip and flung it on shore, splashing after the bobbing pink makeup case, then disappeared. Chapter 9. Darius Moo. Sophie lifted her sarong and charged along the bank. "Darius, be careful." Water changed from calm to churning ahead of his bobbing form. Some safe space. White water whooshed its way around craggy boulders, consuming others, with a skyscraper boulder at the end. Was it a cave? She couldn't see that far. Jungle foliage and swooping birds hid the worst, but the water sped towards it. Scrub and shoreline challenged her every stride. The impact zinged up her bones and burned muscle. So much for working out. And paradise? This was hell. Hell, and she'd die if anything happened to him. She'd never stopped caring, loving. But leave it to Darius to jump without asking, to act without analyzing best interests, weighing risks and returns. Gravel slid beneath her feet, and she threw out her arms to compensate. Where was he? A cork of black curls and bare skin popped atop the churning waves. "Darius, get out of there now," she shouted. "This is stupid." Oblivious, he swam ahead, then disappeared. Her makeup case sucked up into a whirlpool, a spinning pink cyclone, contents spewing, and she tripped. The world turned, sand and shore up top, sky and rock on the bottom. Heart thundering, she pushed up, dashed junk off her front, and ran, searching for signs. Anything. Water swallowed the cave entrance. Or was it the other way around? Quiet felt like a sick blanket over the rush of water. The stupid birds had to pick now to shut up. "Darius. Darius Moo," she cried, My own little Dari. How long had it been since she'd called him that? She'd never used the term outside their apartment, and never above a whisper. She stopped to take in the scene of river, rock, and the absence of aid. Alone felt horrible. Where are you? She called out. Damn Morgan. Damn her foolish need to pretend that she was a nothing, when she was all her husband wanted. She'd welcome help now, yet there was no one. She stepped ahead and braced a hand on the wet rock at the cave's mouth. Her skin prickled. Each pore was alive and pulsing. The current gushed. Her stomach dropped. A narrow ledge was all that remained of the shore. She felt it more than saw. Tiny crumbles beneath her toes set her fear on high, but anger fell away like the rocky shelf yielding to futures. She didn't want to feel broken anymore, or disappointed and ashamed of herself for the love she'd refused to give. Thicker skin and a belief in herself are what she needed. Dari had that. He took whatever came, rose above it, conquered, and commanded. Where was he? Shadows cut a dancing arc on the water where the sun streamed and darkness began. Dari, answer me. An echo returned, but that was no comfort. Still her heart hung on, beating while not beating. I'm sorry, she cried, as if regret counted for anything. All she imagined was Dari gone. His baiting, her debating, and all that brilliant life and energy couldn't disappear beneath the same water she'd found so refreshing. She tested the craggy ledge with a bare foot. Her tender flesh was past pain. She stepped deeper inside the cavern. Mist sprayed her face. Cold, clammy rock glanced against her spine, chilling her bare shoulders. The way ahead loomed like the deafening inside of the dark unknown she'd visited after they'd lost their child. Dari would have no babies now, no family of his own, only the expanded unit that would blame Sophie for the loss of their son, brother, uncle, cousin. The list was endless, and his relatives would be right. Her husband's chivalrous streak, his idol worship, born of ancient tradition that bid him remain faithful to the woman who couldn't supply his basic needs, had kept their marriage going for how long? And she wanted that back. To have and to hold, to cherish like the precious gift it was. She hugged slick stone, took another step. Her gasp ricocheted around her. Maybe it didn't. The current was deafening, and so was the sound of her own sweat. Imagination? Panic attack? Her legs noodled. Her brain rebelled, but she edged deeper inside, plastering palms against the damp, seeking some security, some sign of her husband, her heart. Darius Mu, answer me, she called. I'll always love you. I'll never stop. She hiccuped while her face flamed. Hot tears streamed, twin rivers to match this devil's pool that swallowed her Dari. Don't leave me, please. God, don't leave me. She'd said the same in the hospital. After she'd lost everything, but not everything. Promise me. I promise, but go, came a welcome rumble, and no more shouting. Dari? Was she dreaming? She bit her quivering lip, too fearful to switch position on the slick stone. Where are you? Coming up beside you, he crooned. I'll get us out, but hush. You're okay. How is that possible? She clung to the warm, welcome fingers squeezing her shoulder. Go. He turned her around in a firm motion. I'm here with you. Now let's get out of here, he growled. Adrenaline transformed her into a mountain goat, or maybe it was knowing Dari had her back. Step, step, step. He was alive and she was too. But why the crazy exit? What is it? She shouted as soon as they'd cleared the stone overhang and landed on firmer ground. And then she heard a high-pitched squeal, 1,000,000 of them, then a rush of flapping flew above, around, and swirled around her in a glorious swoop. Bats. Darting this way and that, they formed a cloud. Each bat took what seemed like a unique course, and yet together they appeared graceful. She couldn't look away, but Darius, smacking the air with her pink makeup case, commanded attention. "What is so funny?" he demanded. She couldn't help laughing. "Stop it, you'll hurt them." "Better them than us." He gave a sharp nod as he were warding off atomic bombs. "You think I'm joking? This is why I didn't respond to you. It's not funny, Sophie." No, not at all. Darius was marvelous, masculine, and dripping wet from his dark curls to the hem of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer boxer shorts. Water distorted the supporting cast, plastered this way and that. What are those? Underwear. Yes, I can see that, but why are you wearing them? She'd suspected he'd bronze his son's first pair of tighty-whities. He was such a fan. "Sophie, please. Take your bag and let's return to camp." The swarm thinned, but some latecomers glanced overhead. Darius scowled on cue. He dipped his head while trying to look like he wasn't. Camp? To do what, she wondered, retrieving the Fiji Christmas ornament that washed up on shore. "Yes, I'm ravenous, and you are too. Don't tell me otherwise." "Tell me about those first, or I'm not budging." "I didn't buy them." "I did," he answered swiftly, as if she'd get jealous. She may have an hour ago, although the pattern on his boxers didn't exactly say sexy. "Why? You wanted to talk earlier, and I can't think of anything better." His gold chain took the brunt of her curious touches, for the moment. Darius wasn't certain he enjoyed the twist in conversation. He liked the way things were going before his underwear brought up the subject of babies. Darius. He'd live on nothing else if Sophie was willing to keep feeding him, forget having children. His wife, however, deserved an explanation, and after her avowal of love, he couldn't deny her. "I like to breathe," he said. The cartoon motif reminded him of happier times. "Since when?" "Since you left." He frowned, plucked at the offending article clinging to his package, and frowned again. "I wanted to be ready if you came home," he admitted. She'd dragged the whole truth out anyway, and there had been too much between them for too long. "I know I'm not supposed to have any problem, but you never know." It could have been me, partly, after. They'd conceived before, but still. Who knows? I'm just glad we're talking. She tucked her chin. "A prelude to something else?" "I didn't say that." "I did." Birds shrieked, and she grinned. "Come here." Darius stepped toward her crooked finger, then lifted a lock of her hair. He brushed his lips against the tip and stared into crystal blue eyes. His only focus as she handed him the glittery ornament. Then she wrapped damp arms around him, slowly, one and then the other, cinching tight while the rest of what he needed moved into kissing range. "What about my family?" he groaned. "Buy this island, and we'll have the distance we both need. Seclusion." "Don't tease me. I need you." His only wish for Christmas and every moment thereafter. Not just for a night. "Fifitsemu, my little Fifi. Will you be mine?" "I am yours." She tugged the curl fallen across his brow and kissed his forehead. "But you like teasing and soft skin." Her light smile vanished beneath a smoky shake of her head, and he was lost. "I do too. So, we'd best get you out of those damp things. I know how your skin chafes." Sophie was unsure what tomorrow would bring, but tonight was completely covered. "Hold this." He handed her the red decoration sheet bubble wrap, bronze, or whatever else was needed to preserve this memory, although they'd be making more. He tipped her off her feet with strong arms and clutched her against that wiry harbor of muscle she never wanted to leave. "Do you want that?" The pink case lay on the sand, and who cared? I have what I need. Darius never moved so quickly. Yards became inches. He blasted past the rock where her things lay, forgot the buffet, and launched over the threshold toward their second honeymoon. Dilapidated perfection featured swept sands, a bed of clothing pulled from his bag, and a makeshift Christmas tree made of palm and decorated with brilliant tangerine blooms. Worth the risk to collect. He moved her toward the Christmas tree, set up on a righted table, and she tucked the ornament beneath the branches. Adjusted so Fiji, executed in glue and glitter, would mark both their minds. Are you pleased? He asked. Yes, she whispered. Let this be ours. Just for us with no family, friends, or business. Your desire is mine, Fifitsamu. He loved calling her his Fifi. Dariakismu, my Darius, were her last words because exploding volcanoes needed no translation. Hungry hands, seeking mouths, everything Sophie hoped for and more began as their lips brushed, and every inch of starved skin she knew her husband would satisfy. Chapter 10. This Greek is sneaky. A helicopter droned in the distance. It was the transport Darius scheduled. He kissed Sophie's mussed hair, his favorite style, although she could wear it anyway, so long as she lay snuggled against his bare chest. Adoption would solve the rest of what bothered his wife. A Greek child, they'd decided, since Sophie wanted their baby to have his looks. His family would cheer. Who would reject adopting an orphan from Mathraki? A DNA test was sure to reveal some degree of relation. But Darius preferred reveling in the now and his plan to make Morgan a cash offer for his island. Husband and wife, and whatever children they had, would make this their paradise, where their history began and would never end. Christmas, Easter, and whatever excuse he could concoct for ditching the city and those who should stay out of his private affairs would be spent here. Sophie turned lazy eyes his way, and he greeted her. Merry Christmas. Almost. She lifted her head and smacked her lips. Delicious. Back to work. I'd say let your clients hang, but I know how that would end. She pushed up on an elbow, her softer parts telling Darius how things would end if she didn't get up. We can come back once I wrap things up for the quarter. Start the new year right. Pure naughtiness flashed inside her blue eyes before she nipped his lip. She kissed the spot with passion enough to rebuild the Acropolis. Can't get enough of me, he groaned. You're only after my body, too, so we're even, she snorted with pure pleasure. Part of me wonders if Morgan arranged this whole thing so we'd make up and create a better, fully rounded investment opportunity just for him. I wouldn't put it past him. Lizards bobbed their heads in agreement outside the fallen wall, and Darius let it ride. Iguanas were the least of his concern, considering he'd arranged for them both to be stranded. Better get up. We have visitors. Sophie touched his chest, letting her finger wander before she stood to a cascade of gleaming blonde hair. No jitters? You're with me. I'm safe. Think again. Morgan? You're a shark, Andino, a low-down, scheming predator, and I will not let you get away with this, not when a lady's honor is at stake. Darius cursed bad timing when Sophie snatched up her floral skirt. Halfway into her skirt, Sophie scowled until Morgan, dressed like some catalog captain off a fantasy yacht, turned. He gave her his back, but only after sucking in a healthy dose of what he'd hoped to see. He tugged his gold-braided cap as if that would take the edge off his swinish ogling. Excuse me, Miss Black, but I suspected the worst. This Greek is sneaky. This Greek will kill you. Darius jumped to a stand without a stitch on. Relax, growled Sophie. Darius rattled the machete he'd used to prepare their food. Sophie shook her head, despite the thrill. Morgan scoffed. Drop the knife. I have company. Who? Sophie blushed everywhere. My people. Who else? Morgan snapped. Kill me, and you'll fry Andino. That flaky little baklava may come to your funeral, though. Baklava? Sophie squeaked. Darius paled. Morgan grinned. Nia Papa something is an Aphrodite lookalike who landed me in jail. She comes on like Helen of Troy, but turns Medusa far too quickly for my tastes. With a flip of his wrist, he stopped a trail of uniforms carrying food and water toward the hut. You sicked her on me, didn't you, Andino? Me? Darius pleaded silently with his seething wife. That's a low blow, Andino, even for you, Morgan answered. Sophie skipped into a sandal, refusing to go anywhere near Darius, whose cheeks looked like cherries. It wasn't being naked that shamed him. Who is Nia? She asked. Cousin Nia, Darius started. Oh no. Sophie cursed stupidity. Darius kept his place instead of advancing. Nia is my cousin, he insisted with a tear no less. Or maybe it was a cold sweat. She's the kissing kind, Morgan added for Sophie's benefit. Trust me. Nia is a cousin and no more, Darius corrected. You met her at Gamer's Grotto. He tugged on his shorts minus the cartoon boxers that were snagged on the palm wall. The machete was still in his grip somehow, but Sophie couldn't care if anyone got hurt. She battled her own pain. This Nia is only a cousin? Are you sure? Yes, Darius confirmed. Is she familiar with Momo birds? Sophie ventured hotly. I don't know, Darius said with feeling. Whatever cousin Nia does on her own time is her business, I swear. And yet you swore that what happened between us. Sophie couldn't put words to what she believed was private. All she saw was Mrs. Claus in a froth of fake fur and red velvet, spreading word of what she'd planned with Darius over the whole of New York. The whole of Mathraki was probably yucking it up already, not to mention Mrs. Andino and Nana. Don't waste your breath, Morgan advised. He moved forward as if he were the hero of the soap opera Sophie wanted no part of. I'll get you away from this animal. I came in by boat before the helicopter landed. We can take whichever pleases you. I'm not picky. But I did not know of the devastation here. The liar had taken his cue from Sophie's damning glower. We would have only stayed a few hours to get the lay of the land. Then you'd seek shelter at your Fiji funhouse? Darius shouted. He lunged toward Morgan with the knife still in his grip. He yanked Morgan close by the collar. You'd treat my wife no better than... You're dead. Dead, he raged. Why? Morgan gasped. You're no better than me. No better than you? Darius spat. That's right, Sophie said. She stripped the machete from Darius and threw it aside. You tricked me to get what you wanted, and you've made me a laughingstock. I'll treat you right, Morgan said, moving in. What's more, I'm fully prepared to invest up to my eyeballs in whatever fund you've got going. He smoothed a clammy hand across Sophie's bare shoulder. You deserve so much better. Sophie gripped Morgan's shiny blue coat. She pulled him close in full view of her husband. Morgan grinned. Then she gave him a knee, reveled in his grunt, and spat. Go to the devil, both of you. Morgan shouted a curse. Darius lifted a fist. That's my wife you're talking about. Not anymore, Sophie blurted. Not ever. Oh, I'm loving this. The skirt chaser tried to laugh. She doesn't want you either. Sophie growled. Tell your people to take me to the main island, or I'll do that again. She pinned Morgan's crotch with fire enough to burn. If you're old enough to play, you will pay, Mr. Morgan. Full price. How's that for impact? Kendra Sparks' long red hair was tamed in a tight bun only a few days later. Her cheeks bloomed with the blush only love could give. The tropics played a part, but Sophie tried to ignore all glowing as both women pushed their chairs away from Sophie's ergonomic desk. I look forward to next quarter, Kendra said. It was hard to reconcile the sober professional with the honeymooner on the helicopter, but they were one and the same. We'll make a difference together. We will, Sophie agreed, coming around the desk to shake Kendra's hand. But financial success wouldn't fix this mess Sophie had made of her personal life. Darius's withdrawal was worse the second time around. Thanks for squeezing me in. We flew back for family, Kendra said. Still nothing. This has been a productive appointment. I'd have given half of my proverbial kingdom to have witnessed your island misadventure instead of only hearing about it. I shouldn't have lost it, Sophie said. She regretted her temper, but her need triggered respect through the financial community. Sophie Black was going for broke. No holds barred. Zigzags assailed the market despite Christmas slowdown as a result. Kendra adjusted a heel strap. Sophie sighed at the Christmas gift box on her desk. She'd sigh all over Darius if he were here. He'd bought the Tetris game for Sophie to give to Nana. With love to our dearest Nana, the enclosed card read, Merry Christmas. Let's make this new year your very best. The note was signed from Dari and Fifi. Cousin Nia suggested in a separate note that Sophie could change the wording if she wanted. A blank card had been provided just in case. That and Nia's opinion that Darius couldn't find a better match. The Greek goddess had assured Sophie that nobody else knew what Darius had planned, not even his mother. Especially not his mother. What is it? Kendra asked. You look so serious. Well, I am serious, even though what I'm about to say may seem crazy. Go on. Please invest in Darius's new impact fund, Sophie said. He's bought up a small destination outfit to demonstrate his change of heart, and American iguana relocation is in the works as well. Iguanas? Kendra shuddered. Yes, Andino Group has gone green. Not all green, I hope. Kendra leaned in. I want to know about that male birth control pill. That's impact I can get behind. Chapter 11. Deliciously Disheveled. Naturally, Kendra's birth control reference had Sophie flirting with sadness before she ushered her client into the foyer. But Kendra had no way of knowing Sophie's history. Deception aside, Sophie knew she'd never have left Darius if she'd had his child. And, if she could have had children, she and Darius would have had zero privacy. Kids equaled chaos. Pride equated to cold and lonely for Sophie. Saving the entire world from itself wouldn't fill the gaping hole she'd torn in her heart. She'd shredded Darius, too. Regrets swirled like the snow raging beyond her ceiling-high window. Sophie hadn't been the kindest. She'd been cruel and selfish where Darius was concerned. And through it all, he'd been the gentleman, the tender suitor, and the deeply wounded husband who'd gotten sidelined. How could she? Why would she do that? Love was a drug and she wanted more. Clear my calendar, she called to the temp at reception. I'm going out. If she didn't act now, she never would. A thank you was in order, a truce if nothing else. Sophie beelined to the closet to grab her coat when she heard it. Stop right there, the temp said with amazing firmness. Miss Black is out. She's unavailable. She's right where I want her, according to Mrs. Sparks, boomed a savage baritone. Sophie gaped at the raging bull bursting into her office. I tried to stop him, the temp said. It wasn't your fault, Darius told the woman, but rest assured your boss will welcome the intrusion. Sophie's deliciously disheveled husband thrust a manila envelope her way. I've signed them. What? Your papers, Sophie. Don't make this harder than it is. What about your countersuit? She squeaked. There is no countersuit. No basis for one, as you already know. Do I? She fanned her face. Yes. I filed to keep you on the hook. And now? I'll sign whatever else you need when you need it, he growled. Send a courier. I won't bother you any more. Never? Never is a long time, as you told me on the island, but I give you my word I'll leave you alone. Be free. Why now? I need you happy. Blissfully, delightfully, ecstatically happy. He raked his tumbled hair. Whatever it takes. I don't want to be the virus or drug or anything else that prevents you from enjoying this life. The one I'd hoped to share despite my absurdity. Is that why you let me leave you? Yes. So I'd be blissfully, delightfully, ecstatically happy? Did I get that right? What are you asking, Sophie? He lifted flat hands. I want to be clear because... Why did you let me abandon our apartment? The truth? He flared his nostrils. Nana insisted you needed space to miss me, to miss us, without pressure from doctors, family, girlfriends, and even yourself. He glanced around the office he'd never seen, then withdrew the red Christmas ornament from a deep pocket. She said you'd come back to me. Maybe she hoped that you would. But nobody can be right all the time. Your future is yours to decide. My Nana said all that? He set the ornament on her desk. Yes, but I want you happy, Sophie. I always have. I think I believe you. Good. Yeah, that feels good, she said with a surge of longing. You're not broken, you know. Just foolish. No, you're beautiful. You're perfect in every way. He fell short of grasping her hands. My family knows that. They know how I feel. Seriously, she asked, you mean that? He nodded once, then gave his chest a good whack with his balled fist. His lips plumped as if he'd committed a high crime. Any doubts you may have had on that score were mine to dispel. I should have done more to shield you. To impress upon you. Sophie lifted a hand. What about the rest home? Was that Nana's idea? Nana and my mother concocted that one, he admitted. Why, Dari? Why would Nana want to leave me? She was the best thing ever when we... Why? A tear burned her cheek. There are some Greek men at Nana's home, well-heeled and still vigorous. I see. Mom thought she introduced them and the rest was Nana all the way. My grandmother wanted? Sophie gaped. Nana is a catch, Sophie. She's so full of life and... Darius shrugged. She's the most popular girl, but you'll always be my girl, whatever you choose. I have to be honest. Give us the room, Sophie instructed the temp, who sobbed loudly. Sophie had forgotten the girl was present. Please, she added, not wanting to sound clip. Darius frowned. I don't mind. I'm undone, and the entire world knows it. Lock the doors, Sophie said, then rounded on her husband before the click sounded, and not another word from you. But, hush, I said. Planning to kill me in private, said Darius. Maybe. Sophie dropped her coat and gloves. She twirled a hand and slid the long pin from her coiled hair. The mass fell in a silky cascade she knew would please her husband. I have a presentation I think you'll want in on. It's bound to do tremendous good. She snatched the manila envelope and kissed the sharp edge. Sophie, what are you doing? She unfolded the envelope flap and whisked out the contents. 1, 2, 3. She stopped counting and ripped. Torn papers hit the floor, the ceiling, and a deliciously confused Greek. Torn clothes followed, hers and his, after she'd yanked off his coat. You're eager to make an impact, yes? A big impact. On the world as I see it, he groaned. He eyed her, like she was his universe. His mouth curled up at the corners, and so did Sophie's. Well then, she whispered, wish your wife a proper Merry Christmas. Babies would come. Adoption is our option. She pouted just for him. But statistics show that traditional methods of expanding one's family have amazing residual effects. Health and wellness. Tension relief. She pushed him toward the couch. Shall we head to our island after this meeting to discuss your findings at length? Our island? No way. Darius captured her lips with his. Once, twice. Merry Christmas. Their kiss was long, deep, and too satisfying for words. Nia is thorough, he said. She has her own story she could tell? Something like that. What was the going price for our? Sophie asked. A song? Droom, droom, droom. Sophie purred into her husband's ear, then accepted his gift with pleasure. The end. This has been All He Wants for Christmas, written by Anne Malley, narrated by Nikki Franklin. Copyright 2021 by Anne Malley. Production copyright by Anne Malley.